Welcome to election night. It's election night. We made it. I'm Jenniffer Weigel, joined here with Bob Herguth, of course, Fran Spielman, our political experts in-house as we witness history in Chicago. Either way, it turns out it will be historic. Welcome, everybody. We made it to April 2nd.
That's right.
It's been a while.
It was a brutal campaign. A lot of tough rhetoric, tough talking at debates and forums, which there were a number of, and the ads were a lot of cutthroat messaging. But yeah, here we are, and also city council.
Right.
15 city council races, which is also going to be pretty interesting to see how things end up tonight.
We have a lot of reporters in the field. We've got the treasurer's race, of course. We've got Mayoral out in the suburbs. All sorts of things are going to be on the ground getting all of that. But today, I'm wondering, Fran, any surprises? Because a lot of people are saying that Lori Lightfoot had this, that she's got this in the bag. And here's the thing. We were saying this at the end of February. We thought for sure the runoff would be with Daley and Preckwinkle. It was an absolute, right? That was going to happen. But now here we are. It's an absolute. A lot of people think, the polls say, that Lori Lightfoot is going to be our next mayor, which would be historic in so many ways. Either way, it's historic. Do you think there could be any surprises tonight, Fran?
Well, in the mayor's race, I don't think so. The question is, how big will the margin be? Will it be over 60%? It will be a mandate of some kind. We don't know exactly how large, but if it's over 58 or 60%, that's a mandate for change, even in a low turnout election. A low turnout election favors, it should anyway, the party chairman.
Right.
Tony Preckwinkle, who has the ground game, who has the organization, who has the unions, the SEIU and the CTU, to bang on those doors and get those voters of hers to the polls.
Right.
However, I just don't see where Tony Preckwinkle will make up the vote that she needs. She had, I believe it was 5 wards on February 26th. Lori Lightfoot won 11. And now Lori Lightfoot is the one who has branched out and forged coalitions with Matt O'Shea on the southwest side, with the Firefighters Union and Sposato and Napolitano on the northwest side. The Chicago Federation of Labor declined to take a position. They remained neutral. That allowed Lori Lightfoot to get trade unions that had gone for Susana Mendoza. So Lori Lightfoot has gotten the business community, the Chicagoland Chamber. She's the one who's been doing the bridging and the branching out. I don't see Tony Preckwinkle having grown her base at all. And frankly, I don't know where her votes would come from that would make up the difference from what Lori Lightfoot appears to be putting together.
But that being said, it's also important to note that the polls are still open.
Right.
It's only 6:40-ish, so we've got about 20 more minutes with the polls open until 7. They've been open since early this morning, so people could still rush there, and we don't really know what's going to happen here, but we will shortly. And also visiting suntimes.com for constantly updated election results. We're going to have scrolling results updated as soon as we get them, as soon as they're counted and stuff like that. So please keep visiting our website for updates.
And thanks to AARP for making this possible so we can have this gathering here tonight. And also, Bob, you've got some of the numbers in, and as it showed at the end of February, the millennials don't seem to be the ones at the polls.
Right. The numbers, at least so far, in terms of the turnout is expected to be pretty low. It looks like, but the people who are voting, it appears to be our older Chicagoans, 55 to 64, 64 to 74, which is sort of mirrors what happened in the February 26th election that got us here to the runoff, which is a reminder also how we got here was that there was an election February 26th, 14 mayoral candidates and a number of city council seats also up, and the top 2 vote getters for the mayoral race are facing off today, April 2nd. But yes, again, the millennials there was so much hope for them being energized by some of the campaigns, and Chance the Rapper coming out for one of the candidates in the February 26th race does not appear to have materialized.
And for Tony Preckwinkle,
I was going to say, and Chance is now backing Tony.
He took his second choice, which was his father's choice. So that was Tony Preckwinkle. But if Tony Preckwinkle does lose tonight, it will be really a stunning fall for someone who 4 years ago everybody said, please, Tony, run. Please, and that she would be the candidate by acclamation to defeat Rahm Emanuel. And there was a real consensus that she could have beaten Rahm Emanuel. When she took a pass, it was going to be Karen Lewis, and then Karen Lewis was unfortunately so tragically diagnosed with a brain tumor. She took a pass, and then it was Chuy Garcia, just by default, who forced the mayor into a runoff. She is the party chairman. She was the county board president. She came into this election as it looked like the front runner, and she ran a front runner style campaign in the first round, and it wasn't a front runner at all. And so here she is. And you have to dissect this and wonder what really went wrong here. Was she a flawed candidate going in, burdened by the pop tax, burdened by her reliance with Berrios, burdened by the staff and the chief of staff? And then, of course, on January 3rd, when Ed Burke was charged with extortion, attempted extortion, shaking down a Burger King franchise owner allegedly for legal business for himself, for a $10,000 contribution for Tony Preckwinkle, then the die was really cast, and Tony Preckwinkle could not shake that. And so this election, if it turns out the way we think it will be, may have been over at that point, and it would have been very difficult for Tony Preckwinkle to turn it around. She had maybe one chance, and that was to go harshly negative and to really come after Lori Lightfoot. But I don't know about you, it didn't look to me like she made the case why Lori Lightfoot was unfit to be mayor of Chicago.
Correct.
A corporate lawyer, a wealthy corporate lawyer
right.
who defended the elites. Okay, so,
Exactly.
and?
Well, you know, I've been having several off-the-record conversations with some first responders who have expressed concern that Lori doesn't have the experience to be able to handle a city structure. And so while it's against what they want as far as change, they are going to go with Preckwinkle. And I wonder if you're hearing any of that at all off the record from any of the unions or from any other voters that you know, there are conversations that you're having, that people are afraid about her lack of experience in that kind of structure.
Well, that's what Preckwinkle was selling. She was saying this is not an entry-level position. You're not going to take a chance with someone who's never run anything. And the truth is, Lori Lightfoot has never run anything. However, she has been brought in by mayors to run OPS, which is the forerunner to COPA, the police oversight agency. She was brought in with Mary Dempsey to clean up the Department of Procurement Services after the hire truck and city hiring scandals and the minority contracting scandals. And then she was brought in again to clean up the police board after the problem with the lack of disciplinary action against police. And then when the Laquan McDonald tape was released, to do the task force on police accountability, which scathing report set the stage for the U.S. Justice Department to do the same. I remember sitting there at that news conference, and I thought to myself, oh, here we go again, another task force. This will gather dust. And in fact, people thought she was going to do a whitewash for Rahm Emanuel. It was hardly that. And it was a scathing report. People were shocked at how hard-hitting it was. And so she was able then to build her credentials in that kind of way. But has she run anything? Has she ever run a government like Tony Preckwinkle has? No. No, she hasn't.
What about the progressive label? I mean, this is something we've heard repeatedly throughout this campaign. Tony Preckwinkle calls herself progressive. Lori Lightfoot has been portrayed as progressive. And but what's the reality here? I mean, the reality, at least in some ways, is well, you have Tony Preckwinkle, who started out as an alderman representing down, fairly progressive liberal ward in the South Side, and then now is a Cook County Democratic Party, boss. And then you have Lori Lightfoot, who, doesn't have that background, has been an appointee for Mayor Emanuel and significantly Mayor Daley. So, I mean, is that progressive label applicable truly to either of them?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there really is very little difference on a lot of issues between the two of them. And so it's a matter of experience versus the blank slate, the someone who has zero ties to the old way, to Ed Burke, to the party machine. And I always thought that Tony Preckwinkle made a huge mistake in becoming party chairman. It may be nice to be the first woman party boss, but is it really good to be the party boss? I mean, what good is it? The machine doesn't exist anymore. There are a couple of decent ward organizations. There's the 19th, obviously, which today has the best turnout in the city, again. But it's really, like David Axelrod always says, a bunch of spare parts, not a machine anymore. So what is the point of being the party chair? I think it's more of an encumbrance than it is a benefit. She says, well, I'd like to be in the room when these decisions are made and that we forced out a judge and we did this and that. But I think she's far more hurt by it than she was helped. And that's why Richard M. Daley knew better than to become party chairman, even though he could have.
It's also worth mentioning that Lori Lightfoot announced her candidacy while Rahm Emanuel was not only still mayor, but still in the race, so to speak, whereas Toni Preckwinkle waited until after. Is that right? I mean,
yeah.
And then why?
Lori Lightfoot declared in May of last year. And I've heard people say that she ran the best 3-week campaign in the history of Chicago politics. Why? Because 3 weeks out from February 26th, she was in the single digits in her own polling. And what happened then? She got on the air with that Bring in the Light commercial, which was the first one, if you remember, to make the Berg scandal an issue.
Yes.
And then she got the Sun-Times endorsement in a very public, terrific way in terms of, for her standpoint, her picture on the front page, an eloquently written editorial by Tom McNamee making the case for it, while the Tribune seemed to be apologetically endorsing Bill Daley. And then she gets into a shouting match with Rob Martwick, standing toe-to-toe with him at a press conference where she stood up to a bully, just as she stood up to Preckwinkle's attempt to bully her out of the race at one point. So she had this 3-week rolling right into the February 26th round, where Mendoza was collapsing because of her weight from the Berg scandal and Danny Solis. So you had Lightfoot, who had positioned herself, and then suddenly she's surging, and Mendoza is collapsing. And you can argue that the whole thing went rolling right into the runoff. And this was a movement that started 3 weeks before February 26th and continued right into the runoff.
Excellent. Well, we have so many great clips from this Fran Spielman show. If you haven't checked it out, you got to go to suntimes.com and watch every week. Fran takes people to task. Let's put it that way. You hold people accountable, you ask the tough questions. So we want to go ahead and share with our viewers a sampling of some best of moments. And Fran, I know you've got to get back in the newsroom, so we hope that we can bring you back in as the election results start to funnel in. And then we've got Mark Brown coming in here as well. So let's take a look at some best of moments from the Fran Spielman show.
How do you look at the mayor's race right now and what's going on here with Chance?
Can I say one thing? Is your tape out? I'd like to answer this question without you in the room. No.
Is Chance the Rapper on your iPod or iPhone? Doesn't he have to be?
I do have an iPhone, but I don't have an iPod.
Okay, let me go through a couple of ideas for you.
Sure.
Casino gambling.
I'm for casino gambling.
Where? Where do you want it?
I would love to see
Where
a
would you
casino
put it?
in Chicago, and
Where?
I would like to use those revenues. Fran, it's my first day on the job. And not even on the job, but as a mayoral candidate.
No, I'm serious. I mean, you keep saying you're going to do this, you're going to plan that, but I haven't heard the specifics from you other than the one plan
Fran,
for
I
police.
give you more specifics than anybody on the planet.
I understand, but I'm...
It's a really fair question, Fran. And wouldn't it?
I know what you
that
believe, but I'm asking you what you think of what
Fran,
happened
that's your
before.
job. That's your job to look back.
And hold on. I'm really getting into this with Fran. I've been waiting for this for like, no, I'm joking. Fran.
And specifically, you believe there was a cover-up here, or what?
I believe that something doesn't look right, and when something doesn't look right, you investigate, just as they did on me when I'm passing the money out.
So how do you really, theoretically, and in reality, get rid of the ability to ask a fellow alderman who knows better than you what's best for their ward?
We didn't say we're putting a muzzle on the alderman never to speak to an issue of land use, permit, or whatever. We're saying that that voice should not be dispositive and the only voice weighing yes or no on a project.
Rahm Emanuel is going to be leaving office with a very large stack of unfinished business that is going to be front and center for the next mayor. And I think what people want to know is, can the next leader of the third largest city in the country be a person who can bring folks together?
So I'm not going to speculate now on how we might raise revenue,
surely raising revenue is a possibility, but we're going to start with trying to make government more effective and efficient.
Okay, but you know, you have a record of taxation, 15 tax increases. You campaigned against the penny, you put it back. You tried the soda tax, you've done a ton of other taxes. Any regrets about how all of that played out in terms of the soda tax, of course? Would you do it again? Is there something you regret about how you did it?
Clearly the soda tax was unpopular, and we repealed it.
And did you guys ever think that you would see a headline like this? And we'll leave you with this line from Batman. This town needs an enema. See you next week.
Never get tired of Fran's humor. Anyways, welcome back. Chicago Sun-Times, sponsored by AARP. Election night here at the newsroom. We've got Jenniffer Weigel. We have Maudlin Hedgerika here joining us and to talk about the race. And Maudlin is one of our staff reporters and wrote a great piece today with the headline, "Now We Have a Seat at the Table." And Maudlin, why don't you explain a little bit about about what you wrote today?
Sure. So, you know, I spent the last week just talking to Black women all across Chicagoland, and I wanted to make sure I talked to women across all spectrums who represented different age groups and different professions and different areas of the city. And it was just really insightful to hear their hopes, their expectations, and their thoughts about the challenges that this first Black woman mayor was going to face. We thought that perhaps, you know, everyone would be excited and really expectant of change, but that was a little bit subdued. Black women understand that when you are a trailblazer, you face greater obstacles and greater challenges than someone who was not a trailblazer, and they are very cognizant of what happened for the first Black mayor, the Verdoliak Act 29, and all the obstacles, and what happened for the first woman mayor. So they fully expect her to face sexism and racism.
Mm-hmm. You know, I love the perspective of the teacher in her 90s.
Yes.
The woman who was the public school teacher, saying she never thought she would live to see this day.
Right.
And that is what this is all about. That's why this election is so historic.
Yes.
And she faced so much racism in the 70s.
Yes.
And all of the issues, I mean, even back in the, I mean, it's just incredible. We forget that in this day where the millennials are talking about, seriously.
Right.
And they're getting out there and they're not voting. And so you were on the streets today, you were in Inglewood. What is the vibe and what have you been reporting on, and who are people voting for?
Well, it was interesting. So in Inglewood, that ward, as did so many African American wards, of course, went to Willie Wilson, and followed by Toni Preckwinkle, and far behind was William Daley and Lori Lightfoot. What I found, number one, was that there were so many more signs for Lori Lightfoot at polling centers across the South Side than there were for Toni Preckwinkle, which said to me that Ms. Lightfoot has seriously outspent Ms. Preckwinkle in this last stretch. The second thing I found was that the voter turnout in the 4.5 or so hours that I hung out at polling centers was very, very light. And poll watchers said there had been an initial surge in the early hours, and then it just dissipated. There would be 1 or 2 every 15 minutes. So I hope that that does not translate to a wider low voter turnout. The other thing, though, is that the staff at the community center where I hung out said that last week early voting was very vibrant, that a lot of people took advantage of early voting. So let's hope that that's what happened and that people didn't just sleep on this. Finally, talking with the voters as they left the polls, I found that of the voters who would admit who they had voted for, by 3 to 1, they were voting for Lightfoot. Inevitably, the words that were used was change. And just as similarly, they also referenced the soda tax. For those who voted for Preckwinkle, they had a similar word as well, and that was always experience.
Yes, the fear of the lack of experience with Ms. Lightfoot versus the experience of Toni. Were there any undecideds still?
Yes, I think that the most interesting thing I found that there were people who were not happy with either, who did not want to vote for either one of them. Those people, of course, were solid Willie Wilson voters in the beginning, and so they're not happy with the choice of Toni Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot. And I found that several people were telling me, you know, I just don't know who to vote for because I don't like either one of them. And one of them, one old church woman, the old church lady, right, said to me, you know, what's wrong with the world today is that we've taken God out of it. So that's why I voted for Willie Wilson, and that's why I don't like either one of these. And I don't know who I'm going to vote for, but I had to just choose someone because people died for my right to vote. So there's a lot of people who were just like confused because they didn't want either one of these candidates. Remember, the African American vote went to Willie Wilson.
And Willie endorsed Lori Lightfoot.
That is, now that's the factor here.
Yes.
Will they listen to Willie and go with Lightfoot, or will they be like this old church lady that I spoke to that said, just because Willie said vote for this person doesn't mean I want to?
What do you think? I mean, I know it's hard to sort of gauge here, and in full disclosure here, we still have a few more minutes before the polls, close. It's not yet 7 o'clock when the Chicago polls close. But what impact do you think Willie Wilson had on this April 2nd today, race between Lori Lightfoot and Toni Preckwinkle?
Well, I have to tell you that I truly believe that the African American vote is going to be the critical deciding factor in this election. We both know that Lori and Toni solidly have the lakefront and the progressive vote, right? And we know that Lori, according to polls, has the white vote locked up. So the unknown here is the African American vote that previously went to Willie Wilson and Amara Enya. And so the question is, will they listen to Willie Wilson and vote with Lightfoot? I don't think that that's necessarily so, because we're talking about an entrenched church-going population who have so many issues with perhaps both candidates. But they certainly have an issue with Ms. Lightfoot's sexuality.
Yes.
They shouldn't, but they do. And they certainly have an issue, believe it or not, with Ms. Preckwinkle's soda tax.
So there's that. There's the sexuality. There's the soda tax. There are a lot. It's not an easy cut and dry answer.
It's not a cut and dry answer. I think that we're going to be surprised because many people think that Ms. Lightfoot is going to steamroll over Ms. Preckwinkle. But I think you're going to be surprised that the African American vote is the surprise here and the unexpected, and it's going to bring those numbers up. I'm not saying that it's going to change the inevitable, but it's going to be not what people expected.
And also, you mentioned the soda tax, and this again was a tax that was imposed by Toni Preckwinkle and then repealed, and was incredibly unpopular. But it was just one of a number of baggage items for Toni Preckwinkle during or prior to or during this campaign that has turned off a lot of voters. But you mentioned something else that's very interesting, which is that, is it the people that vote against Toni, vote for Lori, is it so much that they're voting, against Toni, you think, or is it just more for like somebody new because Toni's been around so long? Or is probably a stew and a mix of all that maybe, or what do you think?
Well, it was clear from the feedback outside the polling center today that the people who are voting against Toni are voting for change. They don't know what Lightfoot can or will do. They just want change. There were those who actually had listened to all of the debates and could tell me the differences between the two, but they're rare. The majority of the population is looking at two black women poised on the edge of history and saying, I didn't choose either one of these in the beginning, so now I've got to choose, and I really don't know the difference between either, but what I do know is that Lightfoot represents change, and we're just sick to death of the same old thing.
Right. And here Preckwinkle is saying, I will be progressive and I have experience, which will touch on those people who are afraid for someone with the lack of experience and the other church ladies you were talking about.
Exactly.
So it might be a nail biter.
I think it might.
Okay. Oh, Madeline, thank you for all your hard work, and I know you'll be out there in the trenches. So can we call on you to come back if something happens?
I'm going to be at Fox 32.
Oh, never mind. Okay, you go do your TV, you TV star. And if you haven't read Madeline's story, here it is, because finally a seat at the table. Very important. So this is a historic day, and as Scott was saying before we started this, there is no bad assignment tonight because it's historic in every way. Coming up, we have Paul Vallis joining us. Paul's got some thoughts on tonight's election, of course. If we can, Brian, let's roll on clip 1 of Paul, where we had him in for the editorial board, one of the many editorial boards before the February 26th election.
Well, thanks.
We not only closed a massive structural deficit, $1.4 billion, and left them with $1 billion in cash balances, but we raised teacher salaries during that period 17%, and we never closed a single school. Not a single school.
You don't have to close
and
them.
No, let me finish.
Sorry.
You made your comments. Let me respond. This isn't the other forum. Let me respond.
I'm sorry.
So we never closed a single school. Let me tell you what else we did. I kept all of our schools open till anywhere from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night, because I not only fed children 3 meals a day, I not only provided health care, I not only provided coats and eyeglasses when the kids failed their eye exams, because I tested them, but when kids were victims of violence in their own community, I went out and I raised the money to pay for those funerals. Let me also say something else. By taking all the school construction projects out of the Public Building Commission, I tore down every prefab school in this city and replaced it with a brick and mortar school. And we just didn't build Northside College Prep. We built Peyton before Cabrini Green was torn down. And we built Jones and Lindblom. And Carver Military Academy and Simeon. And I built 78 brand new buildings, and 80% of those buildings were in poor communities. I bought Mendel and converted it to Gwendolyn Brooks. And one final thing, 58% of every one I hired on school construction projects and over 45% on professional services were Black and Latino. There is no one on the planet who has those statistics. So I'm not saying everything was perfect. I'm not saying the schools were thriving, but Mary, 4 years after I left, they did the total abomination. It was called Renaissance 2010. And they went in 2004. I was in my third year in Philadelphia. And they said, we're going to close 100 schools, reopen them as charters, and disperse the kids to the surrounding communities. So that's one thing. That's when they began to lose the 70,000 students, fewer students that they have today than they had when I was there.
Kind of electric shock therapy.
Look at you with
My
your
mother
opinions.
would say, you had too much coffee.
Welcome back, Bob Herguth, Jenniffer Weigel, and Paul Vallis is our latest guest here. It's election night, Chicago Sun-Times, sponsored by AARP. We're here talking about the election, the mayoral race, the city council races.
Wait, there's a race? There's a mayoral race?
Yeah.
Is that
just
why we're
a small one, right?
Okay.
And a lot of suburban races. Too, it's 7:02 by my calculation here, so the polls are closed in Chicago. So basically, the die has been cast about who the next mayor is. We don't know who that's going to be. Keep checking back, please, with at suntimes.com for constantly updated election results. Probably not for a little bit. They'll start trickling in soon enough, though. But anyways, Paul Vallis, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Paul, for those of you who don't know, obviously a longtime city official, bounced around the country in different roles with school districts, also here running CPS under Mayor Daley, ran for mayor, and unsuccessful making the runoff in the February 26th race that had the top 2 vote getters coming to today, which is Tony Preckwinkle, Lori Lightfoot. So welcome, thanks for being here.
And which is why I'm doing your show, because I wasn't one of the top 2 vote getters.
We appreciate it.
We appreciate your time. Now this morning, Paul.
They also ran.
That's right. I saw you early this morning, and
I know.
you were talking about Lori Lightfoot. You think is going to get this with double digits. Do you still feel that way? Because Maudlin was just in here talking about that it might just be she was on the streets in Englewood, and there are a lot of undecided voters because the Willie Wilson endorsement doesn't necessarily talk and speak to what she called the church lady crowd, which are some of the more conservative, church-going African-American community members that are afraid of that kind of a radical change.
Right.
Are you still thinking that Lori's going to take this with double digits?
Yeah, I believe, I believe she is, and certainly I'm not an authority. If I was an authority, I might have won one of those elections. But but at the although I came pretty close against Rob Blagojevich.
Yes, you did.
But at the end of the day, I think she was speaking to one constituency as opposed to the other constituencies. I mean, I did some canvassing in the 19th Ward, of course, where I spent considerable time when I ran the schools.
And huge turnout today.
Right, huge turnout, and there wasn't a single person that I talked to, maybe one exception, who said that they were going to vote for Tony Preckwinkle, and there were signs all over the place. Okay. So at the end of the day, I think she's going to do very well in the wards that delivered heavily for Rahm Emanuel the last time. Obviously, those are the same wards that got her into the runoff in the first place. So I think she's going to do exceedingly well in the predominantly white wards. I think she's going to certainly hold her own in the Hispanic wards. And I think your earlier question was, does the Willie Wilson endorsement bring voters with it? Well, I don't think voters follow anybody these days. I think voters, at the end of the day, they supported Wilson. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow his lead. And it's not like you've got delegates at a convention. You're pledging your delegates for a certain candidate. But I think what his endorsement has done, and the fact that he has been campaigning for her in those very same wards, may have blunted some of the slippage that you might experience in those wards. So while I don't think it's going to be decisive, it's certainly going to be helpful. But, the concern here is the voter turnout is so low. I went to the polls this afternoon. They said about half the voters have voted that they would have anticipated at the time that I was voting. So how does that low voter turnout impact? I mean, but I still believe that she's going to win by double digits.
Well, and then also, you bring up voter turnout, and again, in the February 26th election,
35%.
Turnout was around 35%, and what the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners is saying, they're predicting about a similar amount today, perhaps even a little bit lower, but right around that, and that's not a good number, no. but it does inject some unpredictability into the outcome, right? I mean, and also, I just sort of wondered, and we discussed this a little bit, that if people think that it's a fait accompli and that Lori Lightfoot is just going to win, maybe they stay home and they don't vote, which means that Preckwinkle's numbers could go up a little bit. I'm not sure that holds any water, but I just that's something that at least has been discussed.
Well, in the old days, I'm old enough to remember the old days. Right. The machine counted for a lot more. I mean, look, that's why they have the elections in February, the coldest month after November
so
elections.
Right,
of course.
Listen, it's all designed to minimize voter turnout so the organization can.
It worked in '79.
Yeah. But the machine is clearly a shadow of what it used to be, and she has a lot of union support too, and many of the unions, like the firefighters, have endorsed her. Now, while the police. While the FOP has not endorsed her, and that's probably good, I don't think anybody wanted the FOP endorsement. I'm not criticizing, but the bottom line is I think rank and file police officers are going to endorse her. And so, I think she's going to do well. I still think she's going to win by double digits, even with a low voter turnout.
What do you think about the treasurer's race? Because that's something that could also be, what you're laughing at.
I'm so not an expert in this.
I don't know about expert, but, again, it's another runoff. Do you have a preference? Do you have a thought?
I think I voiced my preference on the mayor's race.
Okay.
My support. I think both candidates. There are two very qualified candidates for the race for treasurer, and if I had my preference. But I would, I've made no public endorsement on that race. I think endorsing publicly in the mayor's race was enough.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's up on the screen are the two candidates for treasurer. I believe Lori Lightfoot has called for, and certainly this has been discussed. Do we need these two offices?
That's a good question.
City
clerk, the clerk's office?
City clerk, which is parking stickers and whatnot, and and then you've got the treasurer's office, which invests city funds, and the treasurer sits on different pension boards and whatnot. So they're both elected offices, and are they even needed? Or can this all be done in the auspices of the mayor?
It can be done. The same thing with the city clerk. But that's what they do. They have these offices because there's patronage that goes with the offices. Look, Illinois is the king of local governments. What do we have? 6,000 local governments in this state. I think Pennsylvania is number 2 at 2,200 local governments. And, when I was when I ran the Recovery School District that rebuilt schools after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, what did they have in Louisiana? 60, 70 school districts. So the point is, the local governments, townships. Who has townships? I mean, it's patronage. I mean, the cost of local governments. Now, originally, those local governments emerged because before the 1970 Constitution, the state couldn't raise income taxes, and the state's ability to tax was limited. So the way they expanded the local tax base was to create more local governments with their own property tax power.
Right.
So the local governments emerged not only for reasons of patronage, but also for reasons of revenue generation. But the problem is, when we modernize our revenue system, or some people can say when we went back to the dark ages on our revenue system, depending on your perspective, we didn't simultaneously go in and consolidate all these governmental units that we have. And so we have this, we are the king of state and local governments. So many of these local governments, even at the state level, do we really need a treasurer? Do we really need a Secretary of State, et cetera? At the end, no offense to Jesse White, who I think has been a marvelous Secretary of State and certainly a legend in many, many ways. But do we really need these offices to be separate from the governor's office?
Whether Preckwinkle or Lightfoot wins, what do you think should happen with Eddie Johnson? What would be the best scenario for the city with police and our new mayor? Well,
first of all, Eddie Johnson didn't want to be police commissioner in the first place. He was drafted. He was a career police officer who's worked his way up the ranks, and born in Cabrini Green, and he was the reluctant commissioner. So, I'm not so sure Eddie even wants to stick around. But clearly, when you come in, there are certain offices where, look. 6 weeks from the mayor actually taking over, whether it's Lightfoot or Preckwinkle, they've got to run the city. So you don't want to go in and be shaking things up immediately. So I think there's going to be a transition period, I would think. If I was the mayor-elect, there would certainly be a transition period where you would focus first on, keeping the city running, and obviously key positions like, the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, for example, the police department, the fire commissioner, et cetera, streets and sanitation, those positions you don't change overnight. There has to be a gradual transition to new leadership, and clearly there's no more important transition than the police superintendent. So I predict that they're going to keep Eddie Johnson for a while as they transition as they set up a process to select a new police commissioner.
One last question, because we got to welcome Mark Brown here in a second. Sure. Onto our set. But in terms of the finances, Treasurer's Office, all this money is at the root of so many of the problems here in the city of Chicago. Will the next mayor be able to fix or get under control in a reasonable way without skyrocketing taxes and without pension payments and the like? Well,
that's why I ran, and I think as that earlier presentation before that you spared your listeners, the Sun-Times debate, I was articulating in a very, very physical way, how you could address the city's financial issues. I think, I believe that there is a pathway to fund the pensions and to structurally balance the budget without draconian increases in taxes and fees. But it requires that you have an aggressive, reasonable but aggressive state legislative agenda, and it requires that you just not look at the city's budget, but you look at all the budgets under the city's control. Because the city budget, while it's $9 billion, the city controls $20 billion in revenue. We're talking about the parks, we're talking about the airports, we're talking about water and sewer, we're talking about the CTA, we're talking about the CHA, we're talking about the schools. So at the end of the day, I think there is a pathway towards structurally balancing the budget, addressing the pension issues, while at the same time simultaneously protecting local taxpayers from draconian increases in taxes and fees. And I like to think that I articulated it in great detail during the course of the campaign, and hopefully some of those ideas will resonate with the next mayor.
Paul Vallas, how can we keep in touch with you to follow what happens for you next?
You can call me anytime.
Okay,
you know that. You'll have my personal cell.
We'll text
thanks for being here.
Yes, Paul Vallas, we really
appreciate it. So we'll welcome. Should we cut to a break or welcome Mark Brown right now?
We're going to actually, let's go to this clip of Lori talking to Fran Spielman about what she would do for revenue, and then we've got Mark Brown coming in and joining us. Paul Vallas, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
I think we have to do a number of structural things first before we have that conversation.
Let's go. What?
So, for example, I've been talking about this for a number of years. Police settlements, judgments, and attorney's fees. $50 to $60 million every single year. And we've already exceeded $500 million in the amount of money that we have to go into the bond market and borrow. And if that debt is not restructured over time, it's going to be double or triple. People are appalled when they hear that. There's no sense of urgency. We don't have a risk manager.
Well, how do you get a handle on that immediately?
What I think you do immediately is this. We have about 400 of these cases that are pending at any given time. If I'm the mayor, I tell my corporation counsel, go through every single one of those cases, triage them, and let's figure out how we stop the bleed. I don't want more $5 and $10 and $20 million plus settlements and judgments. Let's figure out how we do justice to the people that have been truly victimized, but let's get these cases out of the court and resolved immediately.
Are they too quick to settle? Are they
No, I don't think they're, in fact, they're not too quick to settle. Another stream that's coming that frankly I think is going to be far worse than anything that we've seen related to Burge are the cases involving Detective Ray Guevara and Ronald Watts.
Right.
We've already had, I think, 50 cases where men have been exonerated or given a new trial on the basis of the, frankly, criminal conduct of these officers. That is going to add up. I said 2 years ago to Ed Siskel, the Corporation Counsel, you need to form a relationship with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office who's handling, and particularly the individual who's handling these post-conviction cases. We know who the frequent flyers are, the bad officers. What they should have done through a memorandum of agreement or understanding, whatever it is, to be conscious and aware of those cases real time when they're filed. And if we know that there's another Ron Watts coming, or we know that there's another Ray Guevara, or anybody else that the Corp Counsel should know is a problem officer, we need to intercede at the earliest possible stage, make sure we get justice for those defendants, and resolve those cases. When they linger for 4 or 5 years, and then they get a certificate of innocence, then they file the wave of federal suits against the city, they're not willing and interested in negotiating. They're just interested in knowing how big's my check, right? It's foolish that the city has not interceded at the earliest possible stage when those cases get filed to try to resolve them and save taxpayers from footing these outrageous bills. There's no sense of urgency around that. I could have been talking to myself because the city and Ed Siskel did nothing.
Welcome back on this historic election night. I'm Jenniffer Weigel, joined by Bob Herguth. We've got Mark Brown here. The newsroom is buzzing. There is no bad assignment on this evening, as we've talked about. And we got some results coming in shortly, I would say within the next 10 minutes probably. Isn't that right, Mark?
Usually the first dump is about 7:20 from the Board of Elections.
Okay. Wow. So
we all want to see that.
We all want to see that, that's for sure. But I know, Bob, you've got some questions for Mark to start
and
things off.
before, just remind people that, again, the polls close at 7 o'clock. It's about 7:15-ish right now, so keep tuning into here, but also visit our website, suntimes.com, for results that will be constantly updated throughout the night. So Mark Brown, our esteemed columnist and friend and colleague, is here to talk about a couple of things. First of all, well, aside from the mayoral race that we also have city council races. Again, February 26th was the initial race, and those that had to go into a runoff, this was the runoff today. So we have 15 races in the city council that are going to be decided tonight, presumably. So what can you tell us about what's going on out there in terms of what these races represent?
Well, you know, the big thing, of course, is how does the new mayor organize the city council? And in trying this past week to get an answer to that, I kept running up against the fact that 15, that's the third of the council, and you don't really know what's going to happen here. You've got progressives that are in trouble between Leslie Hairston, Rod Sawyer, and Tony Folks. All of them could be beaten, although I heard today maybe Hairston is in more solid ground. And then you've got some old line folks like most notably Pat O'Connor, who jumped up to be the finance chairman when Ed Burke had to step down. And some other veterans like Ariel Roboris and some guys like that are in trouble. He's facing former Congressman Gutierrez's daughter, Jessica.
Yeah, that's a.
How much of this do you think is throw the bums out kind of mentality in terms of what's going on with some of these long your O'Connors of the world and these other candidates really facing stiff opposition in runoffs?
I think that's a lot of it. I just think in a lot of places, I mean, because it's not like they're just, it's on, throughout the machine. It's, look in the 14th ward, the voters there stuck with the machine, even a guy under indictment. Right. But that is sort of the current that runs through all politics for at least a decade, right? That people are looking for change, and they'll go anywhere,
Did you notice any surprises today out in the field, out in the world, as you were kind of, right before we went live, I think the numbers were still showing that maybe 35% turnout, just as we had in February. It did not look high, millennial count not high. The majority of those who did show up were in the over 45, I believe, age range.
Over 55, but that was preliminary numbers, but yeah, it was looking like sort of a little bit of an older voter group.
But any surprises today, Mark?
I could only thing that would be really surprising to me would be a result.
Right.
And I am surprised that people still just weren't really interested in this election. It hurts me, as somebody who does this for a living, that people, for whatever reason, don't feel that their vote makes any difference, and don't get out and exercise it. So, I mean, to me, that is the surprise, that it's just such a terrible turnout again.
And what are you writing about for tomorrow?
Well, I'm writing about Toni Preckwinkle from here on out. Now, you gotta, in a situation like this, you have to kind of guess where things are going, and obviously we think she's going to lose tonight, so that's what I'm writing about. And I think Toni Preckwinkle will wake up tomorrow, feeling the pain of a rough campaign, but better off than most people, because she's still county board president for 3 years, and she's the party chairman for 2 more years.
And if
so that's a lot of power.
They're going to have to work together. They're going to have to sort of, at least play nice.
There's not. I found that there doesn't seem to be that much overlap between the mayor and the county board president. They can kind of coexist without being buds. I mean, clearly Ram and Toni Preckwinkle were not friendly, but they work through things, and there's just not that much overlap, I don't think.
Let's say that Toni is beaten, and maybe beaten handily even. We don't know yet. The results will be trickling in soon. Does that hamper her ability to govern at all on the county level, do you think? Do you think that it sort of portrays a weakness that's going to make her less effective as a leader on the county side of government?
Well, you got to remember, she just helped elect a huge majority on the county board in this last election, including 3 or 4 new people who are just totally beholden to her, who she helped them elect them. So, they're going to help her pass her agenda. John Daly, with whom she campaigned today, is still, the finance chairman. She's got a solid majority to work with. Plus, she still controls all the jobs and contracts of the county. She has a lot of power.
Right.
And that combined with being the party chairman, where she now has influence on who gets to be the judges. I don't see her, she can't run out and try to raise taxes next year, but I don't think she'd necessarily want to anyhow. So, we'll see. I mean, she might even be able to do that, honestly. Some of the new people she helped elect pretty much are the sort of guys who almost promised to raise taxes. So.
Yeah. Real quick to interject here. So the results are trickling in at suntimes.com. And with the mayor's race, again, it's still very preliminary. Only 344 of over 2,000 precincts reporting. Lori Lightfoot, 63,000 almost votes, compared to just under 20,000 for Toni Preckwinkle. So that's about a 75 to 25% margin there. So that's, again, we don't know right now where those are coming from, and it's still early in terms of the counting. So that's, can't read too much into that now, but that's a pretty vast difference. Though also the city treasurer's race. Melissa Conyers-Irvin, whose husband is a city council member and alderman, Jason Irvin, is up over Amaya Pawar in the city treasurer's race by about 60-40. So so the numbers are coming in. Keep tabs on that.
Neck and neck in the 40th ward as we scroll down here, Mark,
Yeah.
so far between O'Connor and Vasquez.
Yeah, I would say one thing I did note, and I didn't total the numbers, but I did believe from looking at turnout today that the overall best turnout would be in the 40th ward on up. I mean, with a few outliers, some being Preckwinkle wards, but the 40th ward on up, that's mostly Lori Lightfoot territory, and that along with the 19th ward. I'm not expecting a surprise tonight. I'm really not. Even though I spent the afternoon out with Toni Preckwinkle, she was well received. Aldermen were taking her around, and people, they weren't given an inch. Oh, you'll be surprised. They kept saying it. I don't know. We haven't been surprised yet.
Although we were surprised in February when everyone thought Daley was going to be in the runoff. So, the night is young, maybe.
We'll see.
We'll see.
Not everybody thought that, but we'll see.
That's right. Okay. Well, Mark Brown, everybody should read suntimes.com tomorrow or go pick up your very own paper copy to find out what's going on. And we'll continue to watch the coverage tonight. Of course, suntimes.com/election results, or is it /results? If you just go to suntimes.com, you can find the results and stay with them as they're trickling in. Thanks so much, Mark, for your time. We appreciate it. We're going to go to a clip right now. Richard Roper, our movie critic, has some really funny little moments of mayoral movies. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Richard Roper. This is the Roper Rundown. It's election night in Chicago. Time to look at the most memorable movie mayors of all time. Now, I do have some runners-up, including Bob Hope, who played Mayor Jimmy Walker in Bo James, and Russell Crowe in Broken City, and Jeremy Renner, who was really good as Carmine Polito in American Hustle. But they didn't make my top three. Let's do the countdown now. At number 3, Mayor Goldie Wilson from Back to the Future. Remember this? Played by Donald Fullilove. I love that name. Donald Fullilove. Now, in the 1950s, he was the janitor that told George McFly to stand up for himself. And you know what? He wasn't going to be pushing a broom his whole life. At number 2, Al Pacino in City Hall. If you haven't seen this movie, you got to check it out. The co-writers of this film are responsible for movies such as Casino and Goodfellas and Raging Bull and Taxi Driver. John Cusack plays the mayor's loyal aide who uncovers, corruption. And from Al Pacino, we get the classic big performance as the mayor. But number 1, the most memorable movie mayor of all time. We're talking about Murray Hamilton playing Mayor Larry Vaughn in Jaws. Now, this guy is a great character actor. He was actually Mr. Robinson in The Graduate, but his best role of all time was as the mayor in Jaws. Now, when you look at that movie, think about it. The shark isn't the real villain in this movie. The mayor is the villain. The mayor is the guy that keeps wanting to keep the town open, even though humans are serving as snack food. Great performance by the one and only Murray Hamilton as Mayor Larry Vaughn. All right, those are my picks for the most memorable movie mayors. Hit me up. Tell me your choices. This is the Roper Rundown.
Welcome back. Chicago Sun-Times election night. Jenniffer, Bob, we're here talking about the returns, which are starting to trickle in at suntimes.com.
Right. Yes, right. We only have 344 of the 2,069 precincts reporting, but right now Lori Lightfoot is definitely over 62,000, as Toni Preckwinkle's under 20,000 right now. So there you go, almost 76% of the votes going to Lightfoot. Again, it is very early. The polls just closed at 7, so it is trickling in, and we have Melissa Conyers-Irvin ahead in the treasurer's runoff, so 46,791 going to Melissa. So again, as they trickle in, keep up to date. So, that's suntimes.com/results is where you can find them in real time.
Thank you very much. And also some very tight races in the Aldermanic races, some of the incumbents, very, very close based on the preliminary numbers. Pat O'Connor, for instance, Rahm Emanuel's floor leader in a very tight runoff. But so we've been mostly focusing on city races here, but again, there are a lot of suburban races today as well. In Cook County alone, I got to get my cheat sheet right here, about 115 different suburban communities are having elections, 30 different referenda, so referendum questions that are on the ballot. 145 school districts are having elections for school board members. And again, unlike in Chicago, where there is no elected school board, in the suburbs, they generally are elected, and very important offices, as well as a number of mayoral races. Well, we have Eric Peterson with us from the Daily Herald, which covers generally the western and the northwestern suburbs. Eric, welcome.
He's on the phone. He's not just
Yeah.
a tiny
Oh, yeah. He's
thing
not down
in
here.
the
He's on the phone.
Yeah.
Sorry, speakerphone.
Hi,
Eric, you there?
Eric.
Can we hear you?
Yes.
Great. So Eric is, we're having him on briefly because he's covering one of the more interesting suburban races in Schaumburg, the village of Schaumburg, which is a northwest suburb. It's one of the biggest communities in Cook County. It's one of the biggest economic drivers of the state, and it's had a longtime mayor, Al Larson, that's been a mayor for more than 30 years, and he is stepping down, and there's now going to be a new kind of change of power there. So, and also there's a little bit of a microcosm we're seeing there in that race, what we're seeing in other races, even in the city. So Eric, why don't you break it down for us a little bit about what's going on, just a brief in Schaumburg and what we're seeing with the mayor's race there.
As you mentioned, Al Larson has been the mayor there for 32 years, and at least in the last half of his tenure, he only faced an opponent once. So his decision to step down created an opportunity that candidates saw that this might take a while to not have to run against an incumbent mayor in Schaumburg, and 8 years ago, the opponent that Mayor Larson faced was running on philosophical grounds. He was a libertarian candidate who had a platform that the village should not own or partly own a convention center, an airport, a baseball stadium. This time, the three candidates that are running didn't seem to have any axe to grind. It was just, here's an opportunity, and the issues seemed to come later as the three of them did opposition research on each other.
Well, also, let me interrupt, Eric. I mean, again, this campaign was sort of interesting in a couple of ways. First of all, a lot of money raised and or spent for a suburban race, kind of unusual, right? And then all...
Yeah, we don't see this a lot. One of the candidates, Nafis Rahman, became certified as self-funded because his household had personally raised $100,000 for the race, and the other two candidates, Tom Daly and Matthew Stewart, both received notification from the State Board of Elections that restrictions on how much individual donors could give to their campaigns was lifted because they had an opponent who was self-funded.
How's the turnout? Are you getting any word on that, Eric?
On which?
In Schaumburg.
We don't know any results yet.
Okay. And is the tone on this, any of the people that you've talked to, were there undecideds, or are you feeling like this is just going to be pretty predictable?
This race has become somewhat representative of others across the suburbs, where you have one candidate who has 25 years of experience on the board. That's Tom Daly, and so
he's been endorsed by the. He's been endorsed, right?
Yeah, he's been endorsed.
His opponent that raised the money, Nafis Rahman, is running partly on the basis that there's not a fair representation of the diversity of the village on the village board. So diversity is definitely one of the issues there. Hanover Park is another town where this has happened. The village board there, prides itself on representing a diverse community, but as two of the challenger candidates are pointing out, there are actually no minority, especially from the Hispanic community, none on the board presently.
Right, so you're seeing a little bit of this as a microcosm where you're seeing in the city some, that there's a vision for change, among, is why some of the candidates appear to be running, and Tom Daly has been on the village board for a while, so there's sort of that that conflict, it sounds like. Any last parting kind of thoughts just about in terms of how this fits into sort of a larger suburban trend in terms of this election cycle, or any other wisdom you could offer?
Yes, so I guess some of the things we have seen, as we pointed out in these two examples, we are seeing more candidates from that are minorities, and even though it's not a great number, we are still seeing younger candidates than we've probably ever seen before. It was in a different race than any of the ones I was covering, but we had, one candidate who is 18 years old today, but he was, running most of his campaign as a 17-year-old, just barely being able to run for this office.
Well,
That's very exciting.
Right.
I've got a career ahead of him.
Right. So, well, Eric, we just wanted to have you on. So thank you so much for talking a little bit about this suburban perspective here.
Eric Peterson from the Daily Herald. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Thanks so much.
Good luck with the coverage. We're going to go now to Nader Issa. Can you join us over here? Come on over. We're very flexible over here because you're in the newsroom. It's breaking news time. The the results are coming in, and I know you're covering Harvey, you're covering Treasury, you're covering lots of things. But talk to us about what's going on in Harvey.
So Harvey's been an interesting race. A lot of it parallels what we're seeing in Chicago with a lot of corruption surrounding the city. There's a federal investigation similar to Chicago. There's a lot of back and forth accusations from both candidates. So it really is like a smaller version of the race in Chicago.
Right. And also, just to frame it for people who maybe aren't familiar with the landscape, Harvey being a south suburb, Schaumburg being a northwest suburb, and again, both having sort of, Harvey certainly having a very rough and tumble sort of reputation and history in politics, with a mayor and a very colorful mayor who's leaving, Eric Kellogg, who's been the center of a lot of controversy over the years. We've written about him a ton at various times, and he's not running again. And so frame for let us know here, why he's not running again, who's running, and what exactly is going on here.
The mayor, Eric Kellogg, first of all, last month was implicated in a federal indictment that he wasn't charged, but the federal indictment basically laid out this scheme over a few years where he was shaking down a strip club owner to basically allow wrongdoing, we'll leave it at that, to go on in the strip club in exchange for thousands of dollars. Now, he's not running for re-election because of a term limit referendum that was proposed by one of the two candidates who's in the race now. That's Christopher Clark. He is a first-time alderman. In 2016, the term limit referendum got passed. It prevented Eric Kellogg from running because he's already on his fourth term. It prevented him from running for a fifth. And now he's done. He's out of there as mayor.
Okay.
Are you surprised by anything that you're seeing today? Is there anything that's gone on? Any 11th hour? Any Hail Marys? Anything like that?
No. I mean, there were. If we're talking about 11th hour Hail Marys, there was some stuff last week where one of the candidates who has been in a little bit of controversy with some alleged vote buying in the first round of voting, he now has started to accuse his opponent of being a convicted felon and changing his name to hide the fact that he's a felon. We had a story last week where basically there's no evidence that this candidate was a felon. There really wasn't any real substance to the allegation, but it shows some of the back and forth, the attempts to get ahead in this race.
Right. And we're also checking some of these suburban races, and right now, as of now, there's nothing really to speak of for the Harvey race that we're talking about. But a little early. But again, just a quick update. Backing up into the Chicago mayor's race here again. New numbers in. Lori Lightfoot's total 190,000, which is about 74% of the vote, to Tony Preckwinkle's 65,000, about 25% of the vote. The treasurer's race again. It looks like Melissa Conyers Irvin. About 145,000 to Maya Pawar's 98,000. Again, that's about half the precincts counted at this point. So there's just over 2,000 precincts. City of Chicago, about half of those have been counted. So those numbers are coming in. And there is a significant difference between between the candidates based on what we've seen so far. But again, we don't know exactly where those counts are coming from, so we'll keep updating you. And obviously keep going to suntimes.com for the results, constantly updated and scrolled. Is that a good segue to talk about?
Well, I'd say yes. Let's talk treasurer. So are you surprised by the fact that Melissa seems to be up ahead?
Well, Melissa, she's a state representative, of course. She's the, her husband is Jason Irvin, alderman in Chicago. It's not a huge surprise. She won the first round of voting. Omea Pawar finished in second place. There has been a little bit of a sense that Pawar doesn't necessarily think he's going to have a good outcome to this. He's not at any election parties tonight. He told me he's staying at home with his wife and daughter. So it's not a huge surprise, but it is still early. Only half the precincts are reporting. So we'll see if he can make up what at this point is a pretty sizable lead for Conyers Irvin.
That's right, a pretty sizable lead. So we don't think we'll find any surprises with that. But then again, we don't have all the precincts in. We don't have all the results in. They are still trickling. So it'll be an interesting night. I think Harvey will be for you what keeps you up late.
Right.
So we can check those results. But thank you, Nader, for your time.
Thanks
we
for
know
having me.
you're going into the newsroom and staying on top of everything. If anything breaks, will you run in here and
I
tell
will
us?
sprint in here and let you guys, you'll be the first to know.
Can I ask one, may I ask
Oh, of
one
course,
last question?
of course.
So in this race, city treasurer, we've talked about, I mean, is this an agency, an office? Again, you have three main citywide offices, clerk, treasurer, and mayor. And is the treasurer's office one that's even needed, do you believe? Or how has that been come out in the campaign?
It depends
whether
who
it's
you
needed?
ask. If you're asking the candidates who are running, they're going to say, yeah, of
course,
it's needed.
yeah.
But it is. I mean, there's some benefit to it. Conyers Irvin, for example, has proposed moving this Office of Financial Analysis that is in part of the city council, moving it under her purview and wanting to take control of that, basically being a one-stop shop for financial analysis for all city departments, auditing city departments. So in a way, the treasurer's office could be the separate office that basically is a watchdog and looks over the rest of the city departments. So again, it depends who you ask. There is some benefit to it.
Okay. Well, Fran Spielman sat down with both of the treasurer candidates for this Fran Spielman Show, our City Hall reporter. So let's go to that clip. Pick any of them.
Number one, we want to make certain that there's an independent analysis of the city's financial situation. Independent. By that I mean independent of the mayor's office. We need to make certain that we're providing an annual analysis of not only CPS and the sister agencies, but we want to provide an annual analysis of the pension funds. We want to provide an annual analysis of the budget and bond deals. And really the fourth point is all encompassing. We want to make certain that there's a one-stop shop for financial analysis for residents in the city of Chicago to make certain that it is accessible. What my goal is as the next city treasurer is to make certain that we're transparent, that we're accountable, and that we're efficient.
Well, wait a second. You sound like you want to take over the office that Omea Pawar fought to create, which is the Office of Financial Analysis.
COFA.
COFA.
That's correct.
You do. What's wrong with that?
I think the office was established to be modeled after the Congressional Budget Office so that the legislative branch of government was a co-equal branch of government. Moving a office that's set up to create independence for the city council back into the executive office doesn't create independence. What we need to do is unshackle that office. And one of the problems with it is Chairman Burke and Chairman Austin have been putting their thumbs on that and making it really difficult for Ben Winnick to do his job. I think the city council took some really proactive steps last year in allowing that office to provide fiscal impact notes and analysis on bond deals and TIF deals and take a step further than what we did when we first initially passed it. I just don't think moving a legislative function into the executive branch makes the city council more independent.
So let's talk about that. Number one, COFA is ineffective. That's number one. It's not timely, and it's not providing information to the public. What I'm proposing for that office to transfer to the city treasurer's office is number one, transparency. Number two, we need information to be accessible to taxpayers. It's time that taxpayers know the real deal. And what I'm proposing is that this office provide the financial analysis from the treasurer's office so that we can be transparent.
Welcome back. Chicago Sun-Times live coverage on election night, historic election night. I'm Jenniffer Weigel with Bob Herguth. We've got Mary Anderson from AARP, now the Illinois Chicago director of AARP. So We have some results as far as the age of the voters, at least the higher turnout of our voters. Again, only 35%-ish in the turnout department, which is still low. But what were some of the numbers, Bob?
Yeah, I spoke a few hours. It's a few hours old, but it should be in the ballpark, at least in terms of talking to the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners, which is handling the city election. And yes, turnout again. They were guessing around what it was in the February election, when there were 14 mayoral candidates that led to these two running in the runoff today, around 35%. And based on their sort of analysis, when I spoke to them a little while ago, it was the biggest voting group so far was the 55 to 64 age group, and the second biggest voting group, at least at the time, 65 to 74. Now, again, millennials are registering more, and there was an uptick in registrations over the past couple of years, voter registrations of younger people, the 25 to 34, which is a large registration group, but they just did not turn out like older folks. And which is what actually happened in the February 26th election to some extent. There was a big, that they were a big driver of the results. Why do you think all this is?
Well, when we did a survey of our members right before the election, 89% of our members said that they were going to be voting in this election. So older voters are turning out. I mean, 55% of the voters tonight are 55 years and older, which is ironic since the candidates many times were ignoring the issues of older voters. And we've been working very hard to bring those issues directly to both these candidates that were running tonight, making sure that they were listening to the issues that are important to our voters, and we're going to be holding them accountable afterwards as well.
Well, you had a couple of really excellent forums where you had people getting to ask the questions that they wanted answered. What surprised you by some of those forums? I mean, first of all, the turnout was great, and it's wonderful to be in the community, but was there anything that you found shocking or that you didn't expect?
I think probably what the most surprising is having people afterwards say, thank you, this is the first time we've actually been able to speak. There was talking about so many, there was dozens of these forums, right, all over the city, and so many times was folks sitting and listening, and here was an opportunity for voters to actually state directly to the candidates the issues that are important to them, and the candidates had to listen. And so we've had a lot of folks say thank you for actually listening and taking these issues directly to the candidates.
What do you think the most important issue or issues are for your organization, for the demographic you represent in the city of Chicago?
Sure, our members are telling us essential services, so bringing back the Department of Aging, getting those caregiving services out there, getting those mental health services out there, affordability issues. We're having members talking about how they cannot afford the property taxes, they cannot afford utilities, they can't afford all these additional fees. And then finally, public safety. Public safety is a huge issue for older voters. And we're not just talking about, we need more cops on the street. What we're really talking about is at the community level, really building safe neighborhoods, making it possible for folks to walk to the grocery store, folks to be able to take their grandkids to the park. Those are the really big issues for our voters.
Well, we have a great video that we could share with our viewers, but before we go to that, did you remember?
Before we go to that, just again, and more results are coming in here.
Oh, cool.
Suntimes.com, again, constantly updated here.
Yes.
1,300, more than 1,300 of 2,000 precincts reporting. Lori Lightfoot's lead is incredibly big. It's 250,000 votes she's got compared to Tony Preckwinkle's 86,000. So about 74% to about 26% of the split there. So Lori Lightfoot with a very large commanding lead at this point. Again, still, do some quick math, 700 or so precincts still need to be counted and reported. But as of right now, Lori Lightfoot, very, very big lead in the city treasurer's race, the other citywide race here. You got Melissa Conyers-Irvin at about 190,000 votes to Amaya Pawar's 130,000. So, Jen, you see anything else kind of here before we cut to what we need to?
Nope, still some nail biters in the ward races. The 40th ward runoff is almost neck and neck, so that's very interesting with O'Connor, as we were talking earlier to Mark Brown about that.
Several hundred votes. It looks like separates. It looks like he is down.
Yes, now he's a little bit down to Vasquez. So still, there will be some surprises, it looks like, on the Aldermanic side versus the mayoral side, as Paul Vallis was predicting when he was sitting here in Mary's seat, that he thought that Lori was going to have a significant, commanding lead. Right. And it looks like that is the early feedback that's coming in. We do have a wonderful sort of montage of the town halls that happened with AARP. So Mary Anderson, thank you for all of your support and for all of the AARP support. So let's go to that.
Thank you.
That survey was of voters 25 and older. They are looking for problem solvers.
In the same survey, 68% of folks said they'd heard about someone talking about leaving Chicago.
Public safety is the #1 issue.
For too long, our leaders have ignored issues important to real Chicagoans. AARP, in partnership with the Chicago Sun-Times, held this forum so that our next mayor will hear our voice.
I'd like to know more about the candidate.
I want to see a massive investment.
Police reform, a better police contract.
More jobs for the youth. The crime in the city of Chicago. Our safety.
South Side is just deteriorating. It's becoming a desert.
A lot of families have been knocked off because of the income.
Our youth really need something that's going to keep them engaged and out of jails.
Voters want to see that multiculturalism reflected in their leaders, and at the very least want them to show some respect for who their voters are.
Affordability, and it's housing, it's taxes.
The job opportunities are not here. The taxes are too high, and now they're getting priced out of their homes.
As a sexual assault survivor myself, it's true. There is blatant sexism in our black community.
The next mayor is going to have to make education a priority issue.
Is the police department right now part of the problem or part of the solution?
Problem.
We need more resources. There's a lot of young guys out here on the street don't want to deal with it.
I'm president of the Cook County Board of Commissioners. I'm a teacher by profession. I worked for not-for-profit organizations. I spent 3 years in the Harold Washington administration. And in 1991, on my third try, I was elected alderman of the 4th Ward. I was a founder of the Progressive Caucus. I sponsored every single affordable housing and living wage ordinance that came before the body. And I was one of 5 votes against the parking meter deal. When people came to my ward and said, I want to move into the 4th Ward, they asked 2 questions. Are the streets safe and are the schools good? I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you tonight. I'm actually a member of AARP. Thank you.
I've lived in Chicago for 32 years. In fact, I began my life here in Hyde Park. We must break from the broken political machine that relies upon our silence and complicity while it serves a certain segment. And one moment really stands out for me. And it was a high school senior that asked this question. I'm going away to college, and in 4 years I will graduate. Tell me why I should come back to this city in 4 years. Zip code doesn't define anyone's destiny. Elections do matter. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to election night coverage. We are live here at the Chicago Sun-Times. I'm Jenniffer Weigel, Bob Herguth, and we have some results in. Bob, how's it looking?
It's looking like it's really pulling away here.
It is.
In terms of
a commanding lead for Lightfoot at this point, 248,000, over 248,000, with 1,360 of the precincts reporting to Tony Preckwinkle's 86,000. So obviously very much going in one direction very early on, as many people predicted. But joining us on the phone now, Bob, who's
Carrie
with us?
Liderson. Carrie, thanks for being with us. Carrie is a contributor to the Washington Post and other publications, as well as an author of a biography, one of the first on Rahm Emanuel. And she's joining us now, and she's also covering this campaign. So thanks, Carrie, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. So why don't you talk to us about what do you see in this race? I mean, again, the numbers are not lying at this point. They're skewing heavily towards Lori Lightfoot. Why do you think she has been this successful, at least as of thus far?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the really interesting things, and I've heard a few people
mention this just in randomly talking with people is, we had this effect where Bruce Rauner won because he was the outsider and the one who wasn't seen as part of the machine or part of politics as usual. And, I don't think people are too happy with how that went. But Lori Lightfoot is extremely different than Rauner, obviously, in a lot of ways. So I think it's, a lot about that same effect that people want to give someone else a chance. And one of the things I think that's really interesting with her support is how it's played out and has kind of highlighted the sometimes stark differences between the liberals and, the lakefront liberals and the more activist crowd and a lot of millennials and activists on the police issue, which has been just such a huge issue. And, there's been this campaign against her from that front, but I think also people who are upset about her record with police who, wanted to see more are also willing to give her a chance, like have that same kind of attitude of, she hasn't been in an elected office yet, and even some of her, skeptics, I think, are still interested to see what she actually does if she's in office on policing, among other things. So it's just interesting in so many ways.
Yeah, and also just to chime in here now, the race, it looks like, for mayor of Chicago has been called. The Associated Press, the AP, is declared Lori Lightfoot the winner, and the Sun-Times has as well now.
That's right. AP was first to call it, then we called, and then we concurred with that. So it is official, Carrie, as we're on the phone with you, that Lori Lightfoot is.
Wow.
So how about
well,
that?
I should probably go in a few minutes, but this is, interesting times.
Yeah, one last thing, because I know you do have to go because you're covering this, actually, this race tonight. And what in terms of, okay, so now there's a winner, now there's going to be a mayor, now what? I mean, there were so many staggering problems facing the city, financially, socially. What is there hope here?
Is there hope? I think there's always hope, and even though the turnout was low, I think one of the points in my book with Ram was about the power of the people, and just the institutions that exist in Chicago and the grassroots institutions, the unions, the community organizations, all that. So one of the things that will be really telling, and will probably determine to what level Lori Lightfoot succeeds, is how well she can tap and work with all those players.
One last question for me, at least, in terms of Rahm. You mentioned Rahm Emanuel. What will be his legacy?
I think inside Chicago, his legacy really will be the 1%, and the vast divide that got worse under his tenure, and very much, I think he's very much the reason we have this historic election right now, between starting with 14 candidates who all talk a really progressive game and ending up with 2 black women who also both put forth really progressive platforms. So I think that's also his legacy, and in that sense, his legacy will continue to play out over the next 4 years or more.
Well, Carrie, we appreciate your time. We know you've got to get to reporting this incredible election, and Lori Lightfoot again declared the winner, first by AP and then by us here at the Sun-Times. So, Carrie, thank you so much. We will continue to look for your byline as you cover more of this. And
thank you so much.
Yes,
Thanks,
let's stay in touch for sure. And we would love to share with you guys from the Fran Spielman Show one of the clips of Lori Lightfoot, and as she talks about how she's going to help the city.
I have a brother, frankly, the one that I'm close in age to, and frankly was my hero growing up, who unfortunately spent most of his life in the street life. He has robbed banks, he's been addicted to drugs, he's done other things. He spent the last 17 years of his incarceration life in a federal prison. He's now in his early 60s, has a high school degree, really had no legitimate income, and he struggles every single day. Now, my brother made choices that I know he regrets, but I've seen up close and personal how the criminal justice system and people being in it can really devastate families. My father died while my brother was locked up, and I know that eats at him every single day. He's now comes out of prison, and my mother's 90 years old, and he's not seeing her for most of her, later part of her life. So when I think about these issues and I think about the challenges of the returning citizens who are coming back into our city by the thousands every month. We have got to make a life and a place for them. If, my faith tells me that we have to believe in the power of redemption. And if we do not as a city and as a state, frankly, allow people who have paid their debt to society to have an opportunity to participate meaningfully in the real economy, to be able to take care of themselves and their families, and really address some of the issues that drove them into the criminal justice system, we are missing a real opportunity. I do believe that we have to be our brother's keeper, but I also frankly think there's a real financial and criminal justice imperative. Having people keeping recycling through the system without providing them with an off-ramp that we could easily do is a mistake. It's a moral mistake, but it's also a fiscal mistake. And we are not going to get better as a community. And we think particularly about those communities on the south and the west side that are not well situated to absorb these thousands of people that are coming back every month. We're never going to be able to uplift the quality of life in those neighborhoods unless we also address the returning citizens issue. That's why I put out a policy to start the conversation around what we need to do. But the city has to lead on this issue. We cannot leave it to somebody else or let it just be there be a void there. We have to step up and lead on this issue.
It's official.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, Chicago Sun-Times, election night. We're talking about the mayor's race right now. We've got Tom McNamee, who's the head of the editorial board here at the Chicago Sun-Times, which endorsed Lori Lightfoot for mayor. And before we get to Tom, real quick, the results. The Sun-Times and the AP we've called the race for Lori Lightfoot over Tony Preckwinkle right now. I mean, I guess it's incidental at this point because what's done is done. Not all the votes have been reported yet, though. And right now it looks about 267,000 votes for Lori Lightfoot. Tony Preckwinkle, 93,000. So it is a wide margin. It is a drubbing. Mm-hmm. And also a number of aldermanic races. Before we get to Tom here, just to talk about, there were 15 aldermanic races that were in a runoff. Today, April 2nd, was a runoff election based off the top vote getters in the February 26th election. Mm-hmm. And among the people on the bubble is Rahm Emanuel, who again is the mayor and is leaving office. His floor leader, Pat O'Connor, who is the alderman of the 40th mm-hmm. ward. Mm-hmm. He is in a very tight race. In fact, the numbers are right now that he is down several hundred with 25 of 39 precincts reporting. Deb Mell, who is the alderman, the incumbent in the 33rd ward. Her father, if you recall, is Dick Mell, who's a longtime alderman and committeeman there. She is in a huge fight here. She is down by just a couple of dozen votes with 18 of 28 precincts reporting. So this is a very interesting race with the mayoral race, obviously, yes, but also with the council, which it looks like could change vastly. So with that as sort of a setup.
Mm-hmm. But let's talk Lori, because you, Tom, you were part of the editorial board, all of the meetings where all of the candidates were here. Mm-hmm. And when you decided to, as a board, to endorse Lightfoot, you wrote a wonderful piece. You told us back in February that it was not unanimous. It was a process. And so now here we are. This is historic. Talk about how important this is for our city.
Well, 3-1. She's getting 3 votes for every 1 vote that Tony Preckwinkle is getting. You know how astounding that is? That goes back to days of Richard J. Daley, the machine, and she's not the machine. She's the opposite of the machine. And here she had a 3-1 difference in votes. I've never seen something like this. And as you know, I think what's really important, first of all, why she won is important, but I think what's really important is what she does now. She's got a real mandate. And what she's got a mandate not from the people who have money, the corporate bosses. She hasn't got a mandate from the Democratic Party. She doesn't have a mandate from the unions. What she has is a mandate from ordinary people. Right? Yep. The person who went out and voted because they couldn't get their kid to a school that was a good school, right? Or they couldn't go out and let their kid play in the yard because it's not a safe neighborhood. Or the people who are waiting for a cop to show up, and the cop doesn't show up, and they wonder what's going to happen if the cop shows up. Mm-hmm. All these people voted for her. Now, you got to remember, it was still a very small percentage of all registered Chicago voters. I don't know what it is, but I think it's like 16-20%, something like that, of the total. So let's not overstate this and say that Lori Lightfoot is the voice of all Chicago. That
She's the
didn't
voice
happen.
of the registered voters.
But she's a voice of the, well, not even that. Because only there's 1.6 million registered voters, and far fewer actually voted.
She got 17.5% of the vote in the February 26 election compared to Preckwinkle's 14%.
Right. But given that, this is still a limited victory because a lot of people don't get up and vote. It's still an amazing mandate, I think, for Lori Lightfoot to be the kind of change agent Chicago needs. So she can be the kind of person who can push for an end to the aldermanic prerogative, where an alderman can stop a store owner from hanging a sign in front of a store unless the store owner is nice to the alderman, right? She can push for affordable housing in places like the 41st Ward, which doesn't want affordable housing because there's a racial component that they're concerned about. She can do all of these rather progressive things. She can fight for police reform. And there are people on the far left who think she's not good on police, but I happen to think she is. And she now has a mandate to do all that. And then you put on top of that, the fact that she's going to get a city council that may be the most reform-minded city council, at least in the time that the three of us have been alive, okay? Because we grew up in an era where there was no city council to speak of, it was just a rubber stamp. And in more recent years, it's been a bit more independent. But I think now, this city council, with some of the aldermanic elections you're seeing today, like Deb Mell in trouble, for instance, I actually like Deb Mell, we endorsed her, but the people who are coming in are much more to the left, much more impatient, and much more inclined to be looking to reform the system. You might see an elected school board, for instance. Those kinds of things are going to happen now.
What do you think is going to happen to Eddie Johnson?
I think she might keep him. I mean, Eddie Johnson, I think, is well, you know, Jenniffer, there's a real good reason for that. It's hard to find police superintendents. And every time you find one, somebody doesn't like the person. So if you get an Eddie Johnson, who I think generally is well respected, even among the cops, I don't know why would you open that can of worms and create a problem like that for yourself. When Lori goes on there, one thing she doesn't have is great experience as a manager in public office. And one thing she's going to want to do is not have to deal with certain issues like finding a new police superintendent. If I were her, I'm inclined to think she would just say, okay, he's working, let's keep it there.
Perfect.
Yeah.
We have our editor-in-chief, Chris Fusco, who is going to join in the conversation here. So hold tight. Why don't you go stand over there?
Oh, you should stay?
No, yeah, stay right here. This is a party. This is historic.
I know.
There we go.
It is pretty historic.
Don't drop the mic.
I'm going to try not to.
Welcome. Oh, look, you already have a clip mic. You don't need both.
There
Does he
you
need
go.
both?
I'm good.
I'm all ready to go.
We just want you to start singing celebratory songs because this is such a historic day. But talk about the tempo of the newsroom and everything that was going on in there.
Yeah, we get a funny feeling this one could be over early. And I guess the only doubt that I had was, did Tony Preckwinkle somehow have an organization that was going to outflank folks, people taking the polls for granted, and Lori Lightfoot not getting people coming out to vote for her, and obviously that didn't happen.
That wasn't the case.
No, I mean, I think we're looking at a potentially historic result here on multiple levels, not just only in our first African-American woman lesbian mayor, but also the margin of victory here. I mean, we're in there now trying to crunch some numbers and see what were those landslide daily wins like, and you know, obviously there's apples and oranges here with, you know, whether you have to go to a runoff and those kinds of things. But it's looking pretty. Any way you slice it, it's incredible tonight.
I mean, did Richard J. Daley get margins of victory like this? I don't know, but I don't think so.
I don't know. So, and you know, obviously the system's changed back from where we used to have Democrats and Republicans. There's been a lot of references to the Washington wins, and that was a Democratic and Republican system, so things were a little different back then.
I think Richard M. Daley did have one or more races where he had a vast majority, the 70s or maybe 80 percentage, points win. And just to, again, to update the public, our viewers, thank you again, sponsored by AARP. Lori Lightfoot, the race has been called, she's won the mayor's race, and again, the latest, the numbers are still coming in and being counted, but again, about 270,000 votes to 93,000 for Tony Preckwinkle. It's just huge, a huge winning, huge win.
It's a blowout.
It's a blowout.
It is a blowout, and in the city council, and just doing some quick looking at those numbers, it looks like we might have the fewest number of white males on the city council in history. So we're seeing, those changes coming afoot there too, and this is it's an exciting night, like you said, Jen. We've been kind of, Chicago has been this backroom deal, white guy politics town, right, for a long time, and it's definitely changing tonight. And it's changed that Tom and his editorials and many of our columnists have called on is welcome now the situation is, and Tom previewing your editorial that's up is like, well, what kind of reformer are you going to be? Are you going to be a Jane Byrne reformer or a Harold Washington reformer?
Yeah, that's right. That's what the editorial for tomorrow talks about, the fact that this is the first time we've had a black woman who's gay become the mayor of Chicago. It's not the first time, though. We had someone who was outside the organization, somewhat independent, someone who is not the anointed one become the mayor of Chicago. First time was Jane Byrne in 1983. Second time was 4 years later with Harold Washington, okay? So the real question is, what kind of reformer or what kind of mayor will Lori be, Lori Lightfoot? Jane Byrne went one way. As soon as she got into office, she reverted the type. She rejoined the organization. She embraced the evil cabal, okay? Harold Washington went the other way. He said, I'm sticking to my principles, I'm sticking to my promises, and what he got for that was 4 years of council wars, where he couldn't get anything done because the city council opposed everything he did. He basically ruled by veto. And it wasn't until Harold's second term, which is very short because he died, that he finally got a city council he could work with. So the question is, what's Lori going to do? And I have a feeling this city council is more on the same page than the city council 2 weeks ago. This new crowd, I think, is more aligned with her thinking anyway. So I think we're going to see real changes.
We're so used to having sort of the strong mayor form of government in Chicago, whether it was Richard M.
Which is not how it's supposed to be.
Right. And obviously Rahm Emanuel succeeding Mayor Daley. We've always had a mayor who really is, sort of a news engine. It's an Andrew Herman term back for you that remember your Sun Times history, but a news engine. And that's not saying that Lori Lightfoot won't be a news engine, but definitely you will have a city council that I think feels a little more emboldened, will speak out more. I think we're going to have clearly a more diverse city council. And it's going to be interesting to see things. I mean, one of the first things that jumps to mind is the whole rent control debate. So Democratic Socialist candidates were rumbling to be doing well heading into this, and I don't know how all those numbers are playing out, but this is going to be a very different Chicago, and how Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle come together. Both being in the same building, City Hall on one side and the county building on the other, that is going to be a storyline that is going to be very interesting to watch.
It's going to make for some interesting years.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Democratic Socialists. I mean, I think this Andre Vasquez in the 40th Ward running against Pat O'Connor.
How's that going?
He's up several hundred votes over Pat O'Connor. So, this was still about 25 out of 39 precincts reporting. And again, a couple of these other races, just real quick, aside from, we talked about Deb Mell, but in the 25th Ward, you've got Alex Acevedo, whose dad was a very well-known political figure with some baggage of his own, is down by several hundred votes with 24 of 32 precincts reporting. Howard Brookins is in the 21st Ward, is up. None of these are, though, huge. They don't appear to be huge blowouts. Well, maybe the 20th Ward, it looks like it's a little bit of an expanse there, which Nat Taylor, almost 60% of the vote. But again, the numbers are, it is going to be a very interesting landscape tomorrow. And
we've got Mary Mitchell coming in. She only has a few minutes. She's on deadline, so we definitely want to get Mary's take on this. You got to go right. go write something magical.
Thanks, Tom.
He's done, he says. Yeah, it's been, we're going to get Mary in here because she's going to give some insights on this. But, they talked a lot about the tale of two cities. And we wonder now, with this regime, will this bring back some more middle class into Chicago?
Well, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, when you looked at Lori Lightfoot's support in the February 26th election, obviously there was a lot of white voters on the north side, North Shore, came out for her. Willie Wilson did very well in the African American community. It's pretty amazing to watch how quickly, though, the race seemed to change after February 26th. The firefighters came out right away.
The Jerry Joyce voters, right?
The Jerry Joyce voters
who was
coming
very
out.
strong in the southwest side and the northwest side, where it's city workers, cops, and firemen, and here we are.
Yeah, and I would have thought, frankly, when I sat down on February 27th, I thought, well, all right, Lori led that race, but Tony's got the organization, she's got the experience, and she'll probably get some labor backing because they're used to dealing with her and negotiating contracts with her. And frankly, they don't want to aggravate her at the county level. And almost instantly, the firefighters came out, and it just seemed to just cascade from there. And it was very interesting to watch how this unfolded. And I think many of us in the media had the sense that the race was sort of over by early March. And it turns out, dear heaven, we were right. In a bigger way than we thought. So
yeah, but you didn't want to put the cart before the horse. You wanted to actually see this through because you never know what's going to happen. And but then again, it was borne out, the predictions of a total blowout.
And Maudlin was talking earlier about being on the streets in Englewood and saying that some people were undecided, that there were a lot of conservative, as she called them, the church ladies, that didn't necessarily want to go with Willie's endorsement of Lori just because of their conservative backgrounds. And so she said it could be more of a nail biter than we know. And so, now we know that it is, come on over, Mary.
Well, and part of the irony here is if you
party.
talk to Fran and you talk to observers, I mean, the policy diffems are not
not
vast
that great.
between Tony, and Lori. They're not that big. I mean, there's Tom McNamee mentioned Aldermanic prerogative, which the 50 city council members have the authority to kind of do what they want in their wards, and Tony didn't want to do away with it. I believe was her stance, and Lori did. So that was one difference, but otherwise not tons. But Mary Mitchell, thanks for joining us.
This is wild. It's been a wild ride, and I have to go back to 5 weeks ago, about 5 weeks ago, right before the runoff, right before the election, we endorsed, the Chicago Sun-Times endorsed Lori Lightfoot. And I got to say, that was a big deal because few people knew who she was. And they would come up to me and say, well, who is this Lori Lightfoot? That gave her a boost that she would not have gotten. I don't think we'd be talking about this right now had the Sun-Times not endorsed her.
And that was huge. And you also spoke after that election that the millennials did not show up. Shame on them. You wrote about that. And yet they didn't seem to show up as much this time, but it didn't seem to matter because she still got the vote.
How she pulled this off is amazing when you consider all the anti-police sentiment that was out here. When you consider that she was part of the Chicago Police Board, she headed up that board. When you consider she was part of the task force, it seemed like there was too many landmines that she could stumble upon that would just blow up her campaign, but she didn't stumble.
But what's fascinating is that she actually took more action against cops as president of the police board than any police board did before her. And I thought that was going to rally sort of the department, FOP, the day after the February 26th race would have been throwing their hands in the air saying, we've got no good option.
But you realize that the optics was always the community being outraged at the police board. No matter what decisions were being made, that's the optics you got. She came on we went to the DuSable Museum Forum, and there were people yelling and screaming, don't vote for Lori Lightfoot because she was once headed up the police board. So I think there was very strong emotions about her role in that, and how she was able to overcome it is because she was very, very clear that the Chicago Police Department policies, when she was co-chair of the mayor's task force, she was very clear that something had to be done about these policies, that the policies was racist and that they were biased against communities of color. And I think that is how she managed to walk that tightrope.
Yes.
That was the police department's, complaints.
Absolutely. Jumping back just quickly, Mary, when we did the forum at DuSable and I was sitting next to you, it became very palpable, and Mayor-elect Lightfoot is going to have to deal with this, is the anger in the community that is going to be there regardless of who won this race.
Right.
And it was raw and on display. And it was something for us as a columnist and an editor to really we know it's there, but it's another thing to be on stage and hearing it thrown at us like we were the candidates for mayor.
Right, but you know, but I also think that she's taken a bold stance when it came to community. She would stand up, she would stand her ground. If they were being disrespectful, if they were being unfair, she thought they were being unfair, she spoke out to that, and I have to give her credit for that. She did not pander to the community. She actually got out there and said, this is what I believe, and she stood behind it.
Two quick things to interrupt. Amaya Pawar has conceded for the treasurer's race. We just are learning. So Melissa Conyers Irvin has won that race apparently. She was way up in the numbers, even though the tallies aren't complete yet. So that's one thing. Also to break, again, to remind viewers that suntimes.com, keep tuning in. All the numbers are still being updated. Some of these races are not decided. The mayor's race, yes, Lori Lightfoot has won. The treasurer's race, Melissa Conyers Irvin has won. But a lot of these, there's 15 other aldermanic races. There's a number of suburban races. There's a lot more out there. So keep visiting the website and tune in here for a little bit.
From Herald to History, it is a historic day. And as Maudlin wrote about, never thought that we would live to see this day with an African-American openly gay mayor.
I think the African-American woman, there are 7 African-American black female mayors of major cities. There's 7 of them, and now she joins that unique club. But as far as being an openly gay black woman, I mean, who would have thought that we'd be talking about this, especially in a community like the African-American community has had its problems in terms of just being homophobic. Let me just put it that way. They've had that's been one of the problems that I thought she would face. But to our credit, that was not a big issue. They had that incident where somebody put out homophobic flyers, but after that, it didn't have the same. I thought it was just going to be very, very ugly, and it was not.
Well, while we can be, I think, a little disappointed on the turnout side in both of these races, I think where we can look at Chicago is, all of that was overcome in this election. Lori Lightfoot's sexual orientation did not become a huge issue. It did with that incident, but at the same time, every voter in the city looked past that. And maybe it's the fact that there was talk of corruption so early on. And at the end of the day, good government trumps some old habits that might get in people's heads.
And I also think, let's give Chicagoans credit. We've grown up.
Yeah.
We've changed. We've evolved in a way that if we were talking about this 5 years ago, it would be a very ugly story. I think we've grown up, and we got to give ourselves credit.
Are you hopeful?
I'm very hopeful. I'm hopeful in the sense that now we can see a different direction. I think that the problem that Tony faced is that she's old. I hate to say old school when I'm really old school.
It's okay. You graduated from the flip phone.
Right.
You're good.
So old school versus new school. Okay. Even though when you look at Lori, she's 56 years old. She's not exactly a young woman, but she represents younger ideas and a new path forward. And I think that's what Chicago wanted. Chicago's tired. I mean, I'm just going to go back to Fannie Lou Hamer. Chicago was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah. And Lori Lightfoot represented a departure from that.
Right. I'm gonna get back on the.
Gotta go do work.
So you got to put out a paper or something
going on. Is there an election going on?
Let me ask you one last one.
You may ask me a last one.
Okay. I mean, do you think that Lori was vetted enough? She has this. She has a documented background, with, police reform efforts, and she was at OEMC. I did a story about her with OEMC.
I read that story.
And
yes.
Because she sort of, pulled forward so sort of last minute, it surprised a lot of people, including some in the media even. So was there enough time? And whereas Tony, and again, I'm obviously not defending Tony, but she has this long public record where and especially during this campaign, people knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak, or association with Ed Burke and all this other crazy stuff that I think helped sink her. Is there? Do you think Lori was vetted enough by prior to today?
I think that she had a record, not a political record. She had another record. She was a major partner at a prestigious law firm. She was appointed to 2 very important boards. She has a record, and I don't think that digging into her past in terms of like when your story, it was a great story, but the idea was she was a lawyer. What do you think she was going to do? She was going to protect her client, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it is.
Well,
I know that you don't like that because you're an investigative reporter, but that I don't think people were surprised by that. So I think that she has been vetted, and I think that she started running a year ago. She started in 2018. She announced
Yes,
in
May
2018.
May 2018, yes.
She was very clear what she wanted to do. We had time. If we did our jobs, we had time to vet her.
Okay.
That's right.
Mary Mitchell?
Mary Mitchell, historic evening. Thank you for your
you so much.
insights.
Thanks
and
so
go
much.
write some wonderful things. We can all check it out tomorrow on suntimes.com.
You sure
Or
can.
when it's posted online later on. Thank you very much. We have a clip we want to share with where we basically have Lori Lightfoot talking about how she's going to make change, and then we're going to wrap things up for you. So let's check this out.
People want change. They want a leader who they can believe in, who they can trust to take on the tough challenges that we're going to face. Rahm Emanuel is going to be leaving office with a very large stack of unfinished business that is going to be front and center for the next mayor. And I think what people want to know is, can the next leader of the third largest city in the country be a person who can bring folks together, who can offer a positive vision, particularly in contrast to what we see on a daily basis from the Trump administration. We have to be different in the city, and we can be different with the right kind of leader, and I believe that I'm that leader.
Welcome back on this historic evening. Lori Lightfoot named the first female African-American mayor in the city of Chicago. Very exciting. We've got Bob Gallo from AARP, director in Illinois, and Bob Herguth over here. And wow, Bob, can you believe it?
It's a wild race.
I'm in a Bob sandwich.
A wild race. Lori Lightfoot has won. She's won big over Tony Preckwinkle. And we're still getting results in for some of the Aldermanic races, there are a number of them, very, very close, which will also change the landscape of city government and, into the future. So, Bob, what are your thoughts about all this?
It's just stunning. 75%, nearly 75% of the vote. What election anywhere at any time has ever seen a landslide of that proportion? So, I think, again, the population that we represent, the people age 50 plus, seem to be the most engaged voters again. And I think they're the ones who basically have told us and the candidates in the conversations we had with the candidates in teletown halls and at forums that we've done together, they have concerns. They feel as though they've been ignored for years and years and years. We congratulate Mayor-elect Lightfoot. She had made some statements to us that she was going to raise the profile of the Department on Aging here in Chicago, which really you don't hear that much from during the Emanuel years and before, that older voters have concerns that need to be addressed. And it's not just the concerns that we've heard from everyone. It certainly is crime, violence, and public safety. They've been afraid to leave their houses. That's what they've told us. They can't afford to stay in their houses because of rising property taxes, utility bills, a fee here and a fee there. They've really had enough, and I think that's been reflected in this election by those of the folks who came out. And education as well. Some of our early surveys, when we asked people age 50 plus what they were concerned about, they said they are concerned about education here in the city as well. So we've heard Mayor-elect Lightfoot cover all those issues, but now it's time to deliver.
And it's also worth noting again that the voters, at least the last numbers we saw in terms of who turned out and who voted early and all that kind of stuff, like the 55 to 65 and the 65 to 75 demographic or thereabouts, were the biggest voting blocks here.
Those are people,
which is your group. So that's what is that? So what could be done to energize younger people? Millennials who you vote when you're 18, right? And it's just like and in fact, as we mentioned before, one of the largest voter registration groups is that younger demographic. They just did not turn out, and they're not turning out. Didn't turn out in February. Didn't turn out now.
When you had the forums, Bob, was the age range, because they're open to the public?
Sure.
Oh wait, hold on, we've got some breaking. Do we have Lauren with us? Yes. Lauren Fitzpatrick has been covering the Lightfoot campaign this evening. Welcome to the program, Lauren.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're live. You're with us. So are you free to talk?
Yeah, I'm free to talk. You can hear it's super loud behind me. This has been a rollicking party since I walked in here a couple minutes after 7 p.m. And I mean, I know by now, everybody knows Lori Lightfoot's been declared the winner, but the folks in this giant and really opulent ballroom have been acting since that time like it was just hers to grab, and have been calling her Mayor Lightfoot and talking about the new mayor already. So it's been a pretty exciting mood here down at the Hilton.
Are people coming up to you, Lauren? Are you hugging strangers? I mean, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and experiencing, other than obviously ruckus and celebration. But give us a little bit more of the vibe of what you're seeing right in front of you.
Yeah, no, lots of dancing,
Great.
Which also has been going strong since before 8 p.m. Yes, high five. People are in a super good mood. I mean, I'm on Michigan Avenue. The party's on Michigan Avenue. I was on Michigan Avenue in 2008 when Barack Obama won the presidency, and it hasn't quite risen to that level of, just joy and euphoria. But people here are in a really great mood, even with the cash bar.
Even with a cash bar.
And just to remind our viewers here again that Lori Lightfoot has been declared mayor, the winner here, again, with about 290,000 votes at last count. Still have some precincts, about 400 maybe need to be reported or counted here, but there's no coming back for Toni Preckwinkle. It's over. It's not only a victory for Lori Lightfoot, it's huge. It's in a kind of an embarrassing loss, frankly. Toni Preckwinkle just barely has cracked 100,000 votes. And likewise, the city treasurer's race, one of the other citywide elected offices, Melissa Conyers-Irvin has won against Mayor Pawar, who's a former Chicago alderman.
We're rejoined by Fran Spielman. Fran, are you surprised?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I called Lori Lightfoot and got her in her victory suite, and she said she was very humbled and honored by this, and she's going to do everything she can to earn it. And she said that she was hoping, based on her own polling, that she would do really well, but this is just amazing and more than she even could ever have dreamed of. She said that people really wanted change. They were very troubled by the negative tone of the Preckwinkle campaign, and now they have new hope for a new beginning. So with all of this, this mandate, and it is a mandate, even though people will try to diminish it and say it was a low turnout. Well, guess what? Rich Daley and Rahm Emanuel had low turnouts in their elections too, and when you win this smashingly, it is a mandate. And the alderman whose ward she carried, which is just about every one of them, I think, will have to pay attention to her agenda. They may flex their muscles a little bit, but they'll have to worry a little bit also.
Well, she's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, she's no shrinking violet. I mean, Lori Lightfoot is a force.
Right, and she is going in there eyes wide open. She knows that she's going to have a sea full of alligators in the city council in some ways, but...
That's a polite way of saying it.
Well, let's get real.
But use a different word.
But she's going to have her hands full, and she knows that she will.
Right.
And I think she's tough, and we'll see if she's up to the challenge, and I think so.
Any surprises with the aldermanic races that you're really shocked by?
You know what, I've been working on the mayor's story, but I see that Pat O'Connor is likely to go down. That is a big loss for the city council, in that he has tremendous experience and a wonderful demeanor in terms of his likability with all the caucuses. Everybody likes Pat. Everybody liked the way he ran finance in the few months that he did. Because he wasn't imperious like Ed Burke was. He was collaborative.
Right.
And so losing him is going to be a tough one, but he was tarred and feathered with being Rahm's floor leader. And then finally, in the last 2 months, the finance chairman of all things, to have to inherit that real baggage.
And the guy that he ran against here, he had, I mean, there were some problems, Andre Vasquez, right? I mean, that there were some issues that came up with.
Yeah, he was a rapper who had homophobic and sexist lyrics and social media presence that was that. But again, it's the same thing. People want change. They don't even know who they're electing sometimes, or don't care. It's a new face, and they're wanting to make a change. And then in some of the other wards, some of the other aldermen, Howard Brookins survived.
Mel looks like she's in...
Raboiris managed to survive. Again, here's an example with Jessica Gutierrez, where she is the daughter of someone, and that's not a good thing either.
Right.
Your father anoints you to be, well, I'm an elected. Well, that's part of the same Chicago way.
Right, exactly.
And people don't like that.
Roderick Sawyer.
Let's see who else. The 33rd, it looks like Deb Mell is going down. So again, that's another father and daughter thing that, she managed to get away with it once. It didn't work the second time.
Roderick Sawyer looks like he's holding on, son of somebody too.
Yeah, Sawyer is holding on. They pumped a lot of money, the mayor's people did, into Sawyer. Who else is hanging on in terms of the incumbents? Go back to your... this is live TV, folks, so I'm looking at this.
Absolutely, as it's coming in.
For the first
It's flying,
time.
we're just winging it.
Ray Lopez looks like he's going to make it handily, so they pumped some money into him. Hairston is going to make it also. She's going to survive. So it's not like every incumbent is being thrown out completely, but Tony Folks looks like she's going down, it looks like, right? Let's go back to that one.
Yep, there we are.
Yeah, Tony Folks is going down.
Yep.
So you have a combination, but in some instances you had some incumbents survive. But in the case of a Pat O'Connor, and that's the big one, without him, that's going to be a tough one for the city council. That will be a real loss in terms of his expertise and his demeanor.
Right.
And your phone is blowing up. We know you have to go write a story. So
anyway.
We'll share some of your clips with
I am out of here.
You are out of here on this historic evening.
No Batman reference?
This town
Thanks,
got
Franny.
an enema. Yes.
Yes, it did.
Thank you much.
Exactly.
Don't forget your mic.
Absolutely. So Fran Spielman, as the Fran Spielman Show on Chicago Sun-Times here and at suntimes.com. You can watch episodes. So let's go to a couple of our favorite. Lori Lightfoot, now the mayor of Chicago, historically speaking, our first African-American female mayor. Some of our favorite Lori Lightfoot clips.
What we've seen over the arc of this campaign and what we've learned through, frankly, I think very good reporting, is that she makes very bad decisions about the people that she aligns herself with, whether it's Tony Resco, whether it's Scott Cizik, Scott Keller, her security chief, and of course, Ed Burke. This is a person who a lot of people have nostalgia for when she was a fourth ward alderman, but that's not who she is now. She just aspired to climb the ladder of being a party boss, and as a consequence, I think made a lot of compromises along the way that I think have played out and show that she's a very different person. We need somebody who is going to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because they're forced to do it, because there's no other political way out. We need a leader who's going to speak the truth to people in the city, and a leader that people can be proud of.
A leader that people can be proud of.
Welcome back, Chicago Sun-Times. Historic night, as we've been talking about here. Lori Lightfoot has won the mayor's race in Chicago. And we've been going for a couple hours here, and we've had some great guests. And a couple little housekeeping items I wanted to mention here before we go. Again, again, the mayor of Chicago, just in terms of what Lori Lightfoot is going to be. First of all, I believe she's going to be sworn in. I think it's the third Monday in May. Maybe I have that wrong, but I think it's coming up. But it's not immediate, obviously. Rahm Emanuel still is the mayor for a little while longer. He's going to finish out his full term. The mayor's salary, again, more than $200,000 a year is what the mayor is paid in Chicago. It's a 4-year term. The mayor is the CEO of the city, overseeing a $10 billion plus budget. This includes the police department, the fire department, Streets and Sand, which picks up garbage and plows the streets in the winter. There's a huge bureaucracy, tens of thousands of city workers. The airports, Midway and O'Hare, are under the mayor's auspices. Also a bunch of satellite agencies such as the CTA, CPS, CHA. Those are under the direct or indirect control of the mayor. And they have governing boards, but the mayor generally has a lot of control over them. That was one thing I wanted to mention. Also, money. This was a very expensive race in terms of fundraising and spending. Between Tony Preckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot, I believe about $12 million. This is one of our reporters, Alex, who did a lot of this research on how much was raised and how much was spent and where the money came from and whatnot. About $12 million was raised collectively between the two candidates. And Tony Preckwinkle, at least at last count, had raised a couple $1 million, actually more than Lori Lightfoot. And Lori Lightfoot still pulled this off. But yet again, the money was coming ever since the February 26th election that led us to today with the two top vote getters from on February 26th running in today's race. There was a momentum, obviously, with Lori Lightfoot, so she was raising quite a bit of money and from a lot of places. So I just wanted to sort of mention that.
I found it fascinating that a mayor makes $216,000 a year.
Yes, it's
That's
a good wage in some circles.
Not a bad wage in some circles. Well, thanks to Chris Fusco, our editor-in-chief, and of course our entire team here. Brian Ernst over there pushing every button. Bob Herguth, thanks for letting me be a fly on the wall. It's been fabulous.
Oh, no,
I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
It's been fun.
Suntimes.com/subscribe if you're not a subscriber, so that you can stay on top of everything. Get your paper in the morning if you prefer a paper copy like I do. Very old school, as Mary Mitchell mentioned. A historic evening, and be sure to note that this is the first female African-American mayor in Chicago's 182-year history. So on that note, thank you for joining us here at ChicagoSunTimes.com, and thanks to AARP for all of your support. We will see you. When will I see you again, Bob?
I don't know. Next election?
Okay.
See you in a couple years.
See you then.